In an effort to make municipal financial reporting easier for residents to understand and engage with, the South African Cities Network has launched the State of the City Finances, the People's Guide.
The People's Guide is an attempt by ourselves to, I wouldn't say popularize perhaps, municipal finance isn't necessarily the sort of subject you think of as being popular, but at least to make more accessible some of the messages in the reports, so to present city financial performance in a way that is easily understandable. But then also to present some ideas in terms of how citizens can engage with those city finances that they hear about and what that means for their lives and their livelihoods, how they make a living, how they travel to work and so on.
What is the current state of affairs from a financial perspective for Gauteng?
That's a good question. Gauteng, as you know, is the economic and population center of the country. And in Gauteng, we have 3 metros. So of the 8 metros that we look at the city of Joburg, city of Tshwane, and also Ekurhuleni within within Gauteng, excuse me. And just to say that I think these 3 cities are in fact performing pretty well, as you'd expect, being the urban centers within what is already the economic center of the country, and they're in fact in the main being run fairly well financially. What we find is that across these 9 indicators that we use to measure this performance, they in fact are doing pretty well. I mean, top line, you may think that, for example, Johannesburg ran in 2016-17, which is the most recent audited figures we're able to publish, ran a deficit, which means the difference between the amount of money they raised and the amount of money they spent, of about 800 million. Ekurhuleni in fact ran a similar deficit. Theirs was about 536 million, and then the city of Tshwane in fact was different. In fact, they ran a surplus of about 730 million. So top level, you may think, okay, that tells a lot. But I think the deeper picture, which looks into exactly how they spend that money and so on, suggests that in fact the picture varies. Each city faces different circumstances, and so they're forced to budget accordingly. And this is all a long way of telling you that essentially the 3 metros in Gauteng are in fact in pretty decent financial health. As I said, going back to some of the issues that we raised in our main financial report, the question is, what are they doing to address some of the bigger challenges that we have identified?
What are these particular challenges that you're referring to?
Well, a few things. First of all, we have to start with the actual financial model that cities are based on. So cities raise money primarily through charging you or I as residents for the municipal services that we receive. So they charge us for waste collection, they charge us for refuse collection, they charge us for the water we receive, they charge us for the electricity that we consume, but they also charge us if we own property for that property that we own. And that's for residents who are able to pay those bills, because of course cities also have an obligation to provide free basic services to the other residents who cannot. Now the problem with that financial model, and I say problem, because it's a financial model that exists around the world, but it's very heavily dependent on property rates. And so that means that the city gets a large portion of their budget is actually dependent on the revenue they get from property rates, which in itself is fine. But in South Africa, where we're facing an urban situation where the cities are in fact very spread out, and the reason they're spread out is because development keeps happening on the periphery. And cities like that because every new development means more money that's coming into their coffers. But that, of course, is at odds with what we prefer, which is for a city to be more dense, which gives us the amount of, for example, if you have more people living in a more compact area, people are able to get to work a lot quicker. They're able to waste less time in their lives. They're able to spend less money on transportation, which gives them more money to survive. So to make that change, though, we have to change the city's dependence on property rates. But their revenue model is predicated on it. So it's a sort of a big, you need to shift the whole logic of how the cities are funded to achieve the goals that we've set ourselves as South Africans for our cities.
So what becomes the way forward in this case?
Well, the way forward from my perspective as a researcher who's working in the space and coming up with some of these ideas by looking at the data, from my perspective, it would mean engaging with decision makers at the various levels of government who are able to have the policy discussion, which is the discussion around what should in fact be done in terms of revisiting the financing model for cities. But that, of course, is a very different question than one which the ordinary resident perhaps is interested in. They would be concerned about whether into the future they will still be able to afford municipal bills, which is another thing that we look at in our main report, but also in this report. And one of the worrying things, and actually a fairly immediate concern to citizens, would be the fact that municipal bills, which I described in terms of the charges that we face for the municipal services we consume, are in fact a bigger burden for the poorer residents of the city than they are for the bigger residents. Despite the fact that poorer residents are expected to pay a smaller percentage of their income towards those bills, they still find that space in a worsening economic environment is more difficult for them. So that is definitely a cause of worry in a country where not just the country but the cities themselves reflect the inequalities that exist.
Hi, I'm Jen Su and you're watching Joburg Today.